Good morning and welcome to a stream from the ACT Chess Association covering the online events which are being run by the ACT Chess Association at least up until the end of this year. Most of ACT Chess has gone back to face-to-face over-the-board play, including street chess. And I want to give a quick plug, not just to street chess on Saturdays in this Canberra City at King O'Malley's, but also next Saturday, the 18th, will be the ACT Rapid Play Championship, which is open to all ACT Chess Association and ACT Junior Chess League members. And there's always a popular event. I think last year we had over 40 players playing in that event. So that's on Saturday, the 18th of December. So the game I'm looking at comes from last night's ACT Online Standard that we run and have been running since the middle of the year in different forms. It's a long time control event. So each player starts with 40 minutes on the clock, and they get a 15-second increment per move. It's being played in Lee chess, and this is played between Jerry Cheng and Diego Garcia. And the win for Jerry actually puts him in equal first going into the final round. So let's get started on the game. And starts with d4. Now, Jerry's still quite young. He's still in primary school, very promising junior. And so the choice of d4 is actually a little bit surprising for players that young. Normally e4 is the go-to move if you're a young player. And by the way, this game's probably really good for people who are newer to chess, because there's a lot of tactics which are pretty straightforward tactics, and the chess isn't too complicated. So knight f6, e3. And Jerry's going to play the collie system, and e3 is the typical move. And c5 is not a bad response. And I'll just show you the ideas behind the collie system in a very brief way in a second. Queen c7 turns out not to be the right move. And as much as I say this game isn't that complicated, this is the kind of move that actually caused problems all the way through the game, weirdly enough. Normally, black will probably play something like d5, and we get this sort of setup for both sides. And I'll show you why players with white tend to like it. Knight to c6, castles. So both sides are just playing natural moves, and they're bringing pieces out. Now, the obvious thing that you can see here is that the bishop on c1 doesn't have much scope. But the idea is what white does is he sets up this position and then aims to push e4. Okay? And it's a very simple system to play. You generally don't have to worry about your opponent doing too many drastic things against you, and you get a very strong attacking position. But on the other hand, black doesn't have to panic. And one of the things is these positions, even though objectively they're equal, often suit white because white knows more about what to do than black. But in this case, if white plays an immediate e4, it turns out that black doesn't really have to worry, because in a sense you're just dropping a pawn here, and attacking chances which normally turn up with these sort of ideas don't actually work in this. So it's a good opening for white if they don't want to really stress about what opening positions they're aiming for. Don't have to be scared as black, as long as you keep the position under control. The only thing I would say for people thinking of taking up as white, it's not very ambitious, and you don't learn much more about chess than how to play one sort of position. And ideally, if you're going to get better, you need to learn more. So queen c7, knight f3, d5 now, bishop here. So we can see the moves, and we've seen the basic moves already. I think black missed a chance here with bishop g4, because you get the bishop out and then you play e6. Often in black side of d4 openings, doing something with a c8 bishop is often quite difficult because the pawn goes to e6 very early on. So again, we're just bringing pieces out. We're castling, pawn to e6, rook to e1. And it turns out that this is where black starts to go a little bit astray with taking here. At first you think, well, what's the harm in taking? And I'll show you why in a second. Instead, bishop e7 is probably more sensible. After knight here, we castle. But even here, white actually does get a reasonably good position. And again, I think it's mainly because the queen's not on c7, not on d8, it's on c7. Because you play the e4 push that you want to, and after taking and taking and taking, you take with the rook is the strong move here. Taking with the bishop is normal and natural, but taking with the rook turns out to be better. Because after you play something like knight f6, the rook actually swings across to h4, and you're already looking at causing problems down on h7. Now, this position's pretty good for white, but I'm not going to go too deeply into it. It's one of these things that I suggest you have a look at yourself. Instead, black took, white took back, and then bishop d6. Now, bishop d6 seems like a natural move, putting the bishop on the same diagonal as the queen, and they're aiming down to h2. But the risk with the bishop and the knight for black in this setup is if the pawn on e4 gets, or e3 gets to e5, you're forking the two pieces. And spoilers, this is what happened in this game. So it can be a bit risky. Bishop e7 was much safer here. Knight goes here first to prepare. E4 again, castles, and then e4 landed. And I'm not sure whether black mixed up their move order at this point and played the move they wanted to play second first. It does happen, by the way. You get so caught up in your analysis that you play the moves in the wrong order, but this is a terrible blunder. Instead, c takes e4 first, then knight takes, and then b6. And bishop g5, and then you can swap here. And again, with the idea of the rook taking, and we're going to play the rook across to h4 for the attack. Turns out that a6 needs to be played here for very obscure reasons, which involve playing b5. Because if you play bishop b7 straight away, which is a natural looking move, attacking the rook jumps across here. And after g6, white is starting to look better, but only if they find the right moves. And in fact, the move that white needs to find here is somewhat surprising. It's queen a4. But now all the play was aimed at attacking on the king side, and suddenly the queen jumps to the left. But the point is the knight on d7 actually doesn't have that many squares to go to. And the bishop on g5 is covering d8, which is the natural square. And I'll just highlight that. This square here, which is the natural square for one of the defensive pieces. So that knight's almost trapped. You can try bishop c8 to protect it, but then queen here, and it's very difficult for black to be able to do anything in this. Instead, they play b6 straight away, and of course, as I said before, e5 is now going to hit the board, and this is what happened, and you're winning a piece here. So white's just winning a piece. Now, you might go, well, why is this game interesting? Why is Sean showing us a game where black has just blundered a piece? It's still important once you win a piece to win the game. And there's a lot of games that I've seen where someone has won material and hasn't been able to convert. So this is a good example of how white does actually convert this position. So bishop takes, pawn takes the knight, and the knight goes here. By the way, there's a really nice checkmate at the end, and that's the other reason to stay watching. Bishop takes h7. Now this is a really good tactic normally, and it's an even better tactic in this position, simply because you're a piece up. So you're almost sacrificing for free in this case. But bishop takes h7 works a lot when there's no knight on f6 to defend. If the king takes, knight g5, king g8, and you've just won back your piece. So you're actually still a piece ahead here, and you've won a pawn, and you're about to play queen h5, and then queen h7 mate. Okay, the classic Greek gift sacrifice, but working a little bit better here. So black actually scurried to the corner. You could retreat the bishop all the way back, and then launch an attack on the king side. White decided to follow up with queen e2. Again, every time the king takes the bishop, the knight is going to g5 with check. So queen d8. Knight goes back to f1 for two reasons. One, the knight's going to try and swing over to g3 to join the attack, but also you needed the bishop on c1 covering g5, because with the knight back on d2, king takes bishop, knight g5 allows queen takes knight. So knight f1, and then black decided to trap the bishop. If you are sacrificing on h7 with your bishop and the king moves into the corner, you've always got to be aware of this move potentially causing some, because the bishop's trapped. So the knight goes here and actually protects the bishop for now. Black took another pawn, thinking, oh, this is okay. And there's a couple of moves here that white can play. But it turns out, again, sacking the bishop here is a nice one. Remember, white is a piece up. So white's got some more leeway to give away material. So plays bishop takes g6. And there are two ways of recapturing. If we capture with the f pawn, it means the e6 pawn is unprotected. The knight will just jump in here, and white will win the exchange. Now, they've given up a piece, they've won a piece, and once you clear all the fog out of your brain in terms of what you're calculating, white will be up in exchange and a pawn, which could be enough to win. Instead, you play knight takes g6, which leaves e6 protected, but it does allow the queen coming to h5. And at this point, white played this really well. King goes here, because when you check, the king runs to f6. It looks like we're getting out of danger. And white played the sensible knight f3, with the threat of playing, if I get it right, the bishop to g5. And then from g5, we're just going to go and capture the queen when the king moves out of the way. So nice threat there, just threatening to win the queen and win the game. You could also, if you're being smarty pants, you could play rook takes e6. And after f takes, still play knight f3 with the same threat. Queen goes here, for example, and then you get a nice checkmate. Queen, bishop g5, king has to come forward because that's the only square. You bring the other knight out from f1 to g3. King has to go to g3 because it's the only square. And then you just retreat your queen down to h3, and that's checkmate. This is not the pretty checkmate we got in the game, but it's very close to it. Instead, the knight just went straight back, and then the rook went to h8 to try and, what looks like, trap the queen. And it was good on black for thinking that this might work. Turns out that it doesn't. Your other option was king e7 to try and run away, but even after bishop g5, after knight f6, queen here, you're going to win that knight on f6. It's pinned. The king has to move out of the way. The bishop or the queen will just capture it. And it'll be a pretty easily winning position for white. Instead, rook h8 at least had the advantage of trying to trap the queen, but I'm assuming white had seen all this in advance because bishop g5 happens. Again, we move the king up because it's the only square the king can move to. We then bring the knight out again, and the king has to go to g4, only square. But instead of bringing the queen down to h3, which the rook would have just taken, white also has h3 checkmate. Checkmate with a pawn, fantastic. Right? Very rare. When you can pull it off, it's a great checkmate. And in fact, the player of the black pieces even congratulated white on playing such a nice checkmate. So a very simple, straightforward game, highlighting the use of the collie system as a good opening system if you want to learn how to attack the king, black king. On the other hand, as I said, it generally is very narrow. If it doesn't work, your position isn't particularly great. But on the other hand, the advantage is the people that play the collie normally know more about the position. So, my name is Sean Press. I run these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. That was played last night in our online standard event. There's 1 week to go in this event, and it looks like there's going to be a big showdown between Tim Pearce, who I featured in the last couple of broadcasts, and Jerry Cheng, who was the winner of the game tonight. They're both on 3.5 out of 4, and it looks like they'll be playing each other in the last round. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you next week.